It's a great pleasure to introduce you to tonight's speaker, Ross Henderson. He was born and raised in Seattle. He's a graduate of Roosevelt High School. He earned a BA in Japanese Studies at Earlham College in Indiana, spent a year at Waseda University in Tokyo. He wrote his graduation thesis on modern haiku, and he earned departmental honors, college honors, and admission to Phi Beta Kappa. I teach for a living, and I don't really need a microphone, I think, to hit the back row. So let me dispense with the mic and go for it. Ross graduated in 2011, which was the year of the March 11th earthquake, tsunami, and nuclear disaster that affected Japan. That summer, he moved to the Tohoku region, which was the affected region there, and he taught English at levels from kindergarten to junior high school, living in Morioka in Iwate Prefecture. In 2013, Ross was admitted to a graduate program in Japanese, specializing in Koten, the language and literature of classical Japan, under my direction. He completed his MA thesis on Basara, which is the topic he's going to be speaking about this evening. He knows a lot about Basara. He's #1 in North America. We can say that much for sure. And he's probably top 10 in Japan when he shows up in Japan. And he was admitted to our PhD program in 2017. Ross has taught for almost the entire time he's been at UW, these 5 or 6 years, distinguishing himself as a teaching assistant in first-year Japanese and in our survey course of classical Japanese literature in translation. We cover in 10 weeks 1,000 years of Japanese literary history from the Kojiki to Kabuki. And he can teach that. He teaches it in my stead. He has also taught in his own right and in my place that same survey as instructor of record. And he's taught both quarters. We have a 2-quarter sequence of classical Japanese language. We take students coming out of the 3rd year modern Japanese language class, and we have them up and reading Japanese in 2 quarters, classical Japanese in 2 quarters. So he's taught that as well. For his excellence in teaching, Ross was given the Distinguished Teaching Assistant Award by the Department of Asian Languages and Literature. In order to prepare for his planned dissertation topic, which is the literature of the elite Rinzai Zen monasteries of late medieval Japan, or Gozan Bungaku, Ross has also embarked on the study of Chinese. He's already attained the intermediate level, whatever that means, and he has won a Foreign Language and Area Studies Fellowship awarded by the U.S. Department of Education, and that allowed him to focus completely on his studies for 1 academic year. Now he's back to teaching. He has presented his research in workshops and conferences at Columbia University and the University of Illinois, and tonight he's taking a break, if you could call this a break, from his teaching and his research to share the results of his studies on Basara with us.
All right, can you hear me? Whoa, can you hear me too much? How's that? That a little better? Still too much. This is good. This works, right? We're working on it. And now it's better? Now it's better. Okay, cool. All right, so this is me. A Fistful of Incense, Basara, and the Medieval Origins of Japanese Maximilism. I am Ross Henderson, but I guess you know that if you're here. So I've also got a number of people to thank, many of whom have already been thanked, but 3rd time's the charm. So all the members of Washin for making this possible, particularly Yumi Iwasaki and Naomi Minegishi. I'd like to thank my advisor, Paul Atkins, of course, for all of his advising. The members of the Asian Languages and Literature Office, particularly Anna Schnell and Jen Miller, without whom none of the physically being here would really be possible. And of course, my wife Riona for the support. So as Professor Atkins mentioned in his very kind introduction, I'm from Seattle. And growing up in the 90s in a city with such deep economic and social ties to Japan, I was exposed to a degree of Japanese culture from a fairly early age. I video games, I could watch Japanese cartoons on TV, and I could buy these brightly colored plastic models to snap together at any number of Japanese hobby shops around. Contemporary Japan, it seemed to me, was just a lot. At the same time, my dad was, and still is, sort of an aging hippie and an avid book collector, so around the house I could find books of traditional Japanese art and books on Zen by popularizers such as D.T. Suzuki, that guy, R.H. Blythe, and reproductions of art by medieval artists like Sesshu Toyo. Medieval Japan, it seemed to me in my younger days, was very cool, but somewhat austere compared to the robot cartoons that I like to watch on TV, and certainly very different from the cool Japan that's been promoted by the Japanese government in recent years. Edo, of course, was its own thing with kabuki and ukiyo-e, all sorts of flashy art and what have you. But medieval Japan, the period between the end of the Heian court and the rise of Edo, seemed to me to always be kind of in black and white. It brings to mind the famous rock garden at Ryoanji, a Zen temple in Kyoto. Of course, if you dig into the history of Ryoanji, things immediately become a little bit more complicated in terms of when it started looking like this, but the image remains. And I don't think I'm alone among Americans in this idea that medieval Japan was kind of austere. Take one guy, for example, this guy, if he ever shows up, this guy, over here, John Cage. Right? About to get his bell call. So, John Cage, for those of you not familiar, is an American avant-garde composer, active kind of mid-century, and I'll play now a section from his most famous composition. That was a selection from 4 minutes and 33 seconds, a piece in which the performer is instructed to walk on stage, not play their instrument for the eponymous length of time, and then walk back off stage. Now, John Cage visited Japan. He visited Ryoanji. One of his major compositions is titled Ryoanji. This image is taken from a book about John Cage and Ryoanji. And all of this is just to say, there's still kind of an echo, isn't there? A little bit? All of this is just to say that it's this image of medieval Japan, kind of minimalist to an almost avant-garde degree, that I think dominates a lot of people's minds. So there's a little John Cage in the background here. If you read the promotional material for this talk, and if you did thank you, you know that isn't the whole story. Is this thing on? I also teach a lot, and I can shout. So can you hear me now? Is this good? Good. All right, we'll do it live. All right. Anyway, if you read the promotional material for this talk, and if you did, thank you. You know that this isn't the whole story. Tonight, I'm going to talk a little bit about another side of medieval Japan, one that's the absolute opposite of everything I've just described. During the turbulent 14th century, as one military government collapsed and another sort of struggled to congeal, a new group of newly empowered and newly enriched warriors lived in a style very different from the restrained opulence that had colored the Heian court.
Can I ask for a little mic, please? I've really lost it.
Well, it looks like this mic is on. What do you mic? That? Okay, I think of it. Just kill it entirely. Technical difficulties. All right, how's that? Are we in business? Yeah. All right. Yay. Thank you all for your cooperation. Is it bearable? Yeah. Okay, we'll do it. Thank you. It's kind of nice, actually. All right. These warriors lived in a style very different from the restrained opulence that had colored the Heian court. The word for this aesthetic is Basara. In Basara, more is more, and better still, more than that. Basara wasn't restricted to design. It spilled over into banquets and acrobatic displays, dog fighting, and tea drinking. The contemporary arbiters of good taste amongst the middle aristocracy and high-ranking warriors claimed to be abhorred, but when well done, even the most sober office holder could be overwhelmed and made to appreciate the power in aesthetic maximalism. Now, I'm not going to talk about Basara as an art style. Very few objects that can be confidently described as Basara survive. So when you want to visualize Basara, you have to triangulate a little bit. And I'm not an art historian, I'm a literature person, and this is a literature talk. But that's okay. In fact, it's great because the descriptions we have in the written record are extremely interesting. In the texts that have come down to us, we get a little window into the past that may give us a fuller picture than a handful of objects would. Where Basara is concerned, literature has privileged access. Now, what literature is that? The meat of tonight's talk will be drawn from a text called Taihei and documents surrounding it. So, Taihei is a gunki monogatari, a military chronicle. Gunki are epic narratives that describe military conflict in language both poignant and poetic. They're also next to useless as historical texts per se. Taihei is not exactly a work of history. There's actually a fairly famous article from the 1890s by a scholar named Kume Kunitake called Taihei wa shigaku ni eki nashi. Taihei is of no use for the study of history. The most famous example of this genre is Heike Monogatari, the tale of the Heike, which tells the tale of how conflict between two military houses brought the entire country into civil war at the close of Japan's classical age, the Heian period. The war described in Heike resulted in the establishment of a military government, or Bakufu, based in Kamakura on the sea, about an hour's train ride from Tokyo today. The Kamakura government was established in 1185 and maintained control until 1333, a little under 150 years. Though the government was successfully able to repel the invading Mongol army not once but twice, in 1274 and 1281, doing so left their coffers empty and their grip over outlying regions increasingly tenuous. When a succession dispute erupted between two branches of the imperial family and an ambitious emperor enlisted armed warriors to his cause, there was little Kamakura could do. This is the world of Taihei. In 1333, Emperor Godaigo proclaimed the Kenmu Restoration, an attempt to reassert direct imperial control over national affairs. He was initially successful, but in the end driven out of the capital to establish a government in exile at Yoshino near Nara. Just kind of as an aside, you know, our cherry trees in the quad are genetically clones, essentially, genetically identical to trees from this region. The warriors that Godaigo had initially enlisted to fight for him turned against him and eventually installed their own emperor in Kyoto while Godaigo was in Yoshino. This fractured the court and initiated the so-called Northern and Southern Courts period. Two courts, two emperors, two sets of imperial regalia, a lot going on. Taihei narrates the fall of Kamakura, Godaigo's faltering rule, and the slow, tentative establishment of the next military government, the Muromachi Bakufu. So that's the historical background, but is it art? The general assessment of Taihei is like Heike, but maybe not as good. The first English translator, Helen Craig McCullough, translated this, says in her introduction quite plainly that, quote, Gunki Monogatari are not great literature. And a note on translations, by the way, Helen Craig McCullough translated only the first 12 of 40 books in Taihei, so all the translations from Taihei that you'll see tonight are mine, and I'll let you know if I'm using someone else's translation. Still, there are a number of things that attract people to Taihei, and one of them is Basara. A lot of articles on Taihei, or even tangentially related subjects, refer to the period as the age of Basara. Tonight, I'm going to discuss what Basara means and suggest that during this so-called age of Basara, it meant something a little bit more specific. Then we'll zoom out, talk about some examples of a more broadly defined medieval maximalism, and kind of go from there. So, what does Basara mean in the age of Basara? I'll give you my definition in a moment, but first, a little bit of what other people have said. Kenneth Grossberg, who translated Kenmu Shikimoku, the Kenmu Code, one of the major legal documents of this period, calls Basara ostentatious display, indicative of pride, self-indulgence, and luxurious living. The term had connotations both of novel and eccentric or frivolous and senseless behavior. So that's all well and good. And you might expect that during this age of Basara, you'd see people described this way a lot, especially in Taiheki, describing warrior elites like Sasaki Doyo, who, if you're not familiar with them, don't worry, we'll cover that. Though in Taiheki, when Basara does appear, it's often as a characterization of Doyo or people close to him, the word itself is actually anything but frequent. Taiheki has a number of different manuscript lineages, and depending on the manuscript, as many as a third or even all of the occurrences of Basara in the text are directly or indirectly related to Doyo. Looking more closely, though, the figures are not impressive. Again, counts differ between manuscript lineages, but in the Seigen Bon text, it's one line, there are 3, and in the Tensho text, the text we're using tonight, only 1. It seems like the age of Basara didn't know what Basara was. So what is Basara? In Taiheki and other 14th century documents, I remember this is so-called Age of Basara, what is Basara? And if it's not Basara, just what is it we see in Taiheki? There clearly is something going on that later comes to be called Basara, and there ought to be vocabulary with which to discuss it. I call what we see in Taiheki transgressive excess, which doesn't exactly roll off the tongue, but introducing a new term lets us take a wider view of the phenomenon and bring in aspects that wouldn't fall under its scope, usually. But back to specifics. So, orthographically, there are 3 common ways of representing Basara. You've got this guy, and then just in katakana, this one. Right? Each have several variations in character use, and it should be said that all these words are attested in the corpus, they all predate Taiheki, and all do have specific meanings. That's important to note so as to not fall into the distraction of defining the words themselves in their broadest possible meanings, but rather homing in with the greatest possible precision on what Basara means when it's used in Taiheki. Nonetheless, understanding the meanings of these words as they appear in their original context is important for understanding why Basara later expanded to envelop the Taiheki maximalist aesthetic. So, the first set of characters comes down through the most common etymology. That's from the Sanskrit word vajra, meaning at the most fundamental level, according to the Sanskrit dictionary I looked at, the hard or mighty one, and practically used to signify a lightning bolt or sometimes dynamo. Here are some vajra-shaped ritual implements from a Japanese temple shrine complex. You can see the common different shapes. This is a typical vajra shape, but this also is likewise, it says here. For this set of characters, this meaning is certainly correct. It appears all over the place in the Buddhist canon. This being the most common definition of the word Basara independently, many have read a sort of religious destructiveness into the later aestheticized use of the term. That is, it's often read as describing actions that in some way disrupt the cosmic order, or actions so brush as to have eschatological implications, it's whether or not you go to heaven. So another theory comes from Endo Moto, a scholar at Tokyo University's Historiographic Institute. He argues that Basara comes from the first 2 characters of Basa, see here, Basa plus the dot over there, describing the kind of fluttering movement of dancers' clothing. The Arya, a very early Chinese glossary, defines the character combination simply as to dance. The Song Dynasty Rhyme Dictionary Guangyun clarifies a little bit that this is the appearance of a dancer. So what about in Japan? We actually do see this use of basa without the dot in a period document. So in a temple record called Gokokuji Kuyoki, which describes an alms-raising dance at which Emperor Go-Daigo himself was present, we have the following description. So at the hour the imperial procession arrived at the western curtain entrance, the dancers and musicians processed in. The musicians played drums at their necks and at their hips, 2 on each instrument. They came forward and basa. The attendants brought the imperial palanquin before the altar, and the emperor paid obeisance to the Buddha. So given the nature of the text, that this is a temple record describing religious ceremony at the temple itself, and that Go-Daigo, the emperor, was in attendance, it can be fairly assumed that the term here doesn't describe any kind of moral laxity or propensity for excess in the dancers themselves or the viewers. Rather, Basara describes the performance, and it's precisely this that's key for understanding Basara in context. You can imagine the dancers in thickly draped costumes, beating the drums as they turned and spun, the sleeves of their robes flying as they jumped and danced. The term Basara occurs several times in the same document, each time connected to the forward motion of a dancing figure. This Basara acquired the adjectival suffix da, making Basara the descriptive form of Basa. This being the case, Basara would mean something like the appearance or manner of a dancer, fluttering, flowing, dynamic, dancer in some way. So there's some context for this in another period document, the Nijo Kawara Rakusho, or the Second Avenue Riverbed Graffito. This long bit of graffiti was presumably found at the intersection of Nijo Avenue and the riverbed of the Kamo River in Kyoto. Walls are still a great place for voicing political discontent. This is a picture from a recent trip I took to Paris. I'll spare you the translation. But as for the content of the document, the Rakusho is acidly critical of recent trends in both consumption and self-presentation. In the Rakusho, the word Basara appears in a satirical description of the impractical clothing and accessories popular at the time. They wear huge leaden swords, outfitted and made to look larger than battlefield sabers thrust pridefully before them, the 5 ribs of the Basara fan, a large saddle on a bony horse, thin robes. Each item described is impractical and purely for show. Heavy swords forged from metal that cannot hold an edge, useless in battle, and instantly recognizable as cheap imitations when drawn from their sumptuously decorated scabbards. An ostentatious saddle on an underfed horse, again, a piece of visually striking war equipment that would be useless when actually put to the test. Robes so thin as to provide no warmth, but from the context, maybe printed with colorful patterns, or maybe suggestively revealing. Returning to the 3 items here, the common definition of Basara could potentially be applied to the whole ensemble, but the 5-ribbed fan is singled out. What precisely is Basara here? There are a couple of possibilities. One is that these fans had gaudy, brightly colored images on them. One of the late manuscripts of Taiheki does actually describe fans with Basara-e, or Basara pictures, but earlier versions of the text don't include this description, and I don't think that Basara had quite acquired this meaning yet. Another possibility has to do with the fan's construction. It's actually the ribs that are singled out. Basara ogi mo itsutsu mo. The 5 ribs of the Basara fan. In the 14th century, the fixed fan typically had either 7 or 10 ribs. Constructing a fan with only 5 may have been cheaper, but it left a large amount of material unsupported. That kind of fan moves air much less efficiently and would require the user to flap his or her arms wildly about to produce any kind of wind, forcing them to move in a basa way, much like a dancer. It could also be describing the unsupported material of the fan itself. Flapping, basa, basa. This notion of the adjective basara describing the fluttering motion of cloth is borne out in the solitary occurrence of Basara in Taiheki. Naturally, this involves Basara's patron saint Sasaki Doyo, and some background is useful here before proceeding. So Sasaki Doyo is the person by far most closely tied to the word Basara. In the text, he's styled as, his name is dates and stuff. In the text, he's styled as Sasaki Sado no Hoga Nyudo Doyo, or the Sasaki lay monk adjutant Sado Doyo. Doyo is his religious name. In this portrait, you can see him dressed up like a Zen monk. This portrait probably wasn't done by him, but it does seem to have been inscribed with a poem in his own hand, so he touched that. Famous for his extravagance, the lavish gatherings he hosted and his taste for luxury are described in vivid detail in Taiheki, later earning him the popular sobriquet, the Basara Daimyo. Unfortunately, extant official documents do not provide any useful corroboration. While nothing directly contradicts the Taiheki account of Doyo, neither does anything confirm it. The records that have come down show Doyo as a participant or commander at numerous battles, first as a partisan for Emperor Go-Daigo, and then afterwards loyally for the northern court under Ashikaga Takauji. He's known to be connected to tea, but no firmly attributable tea implements have survived, only names recorded in disparate documents. His interest in incense is attested in several linked verse poems, but as with tea implements, no primary supporting documents remain. There's a treatise on flower arrangement called Rikka Kuren Daiji, or orally transmitted essential aspects of flower arrangement, that's popularly attributed to Doyo. The attribution is likely spurious. Documentary attestation aside, Doyo remains among the most memorable characters from a work with many names but few personalities, and it's not impossible that he lived something like the lifestyle with which Taiheki burdens him. And as I mentioned earlier in the talk, Basara, or whatever you call it, left few objects, and literature, particularly Taiheki, give us our clearest view of the phenomenon. To say nothing of Taiheki's role in establishing aesthetic norms, to what degree the image of Doyo aligns with the historical Doyo is at most a secondary concern here. I won't go into Doyo reception, but this is how he was portrayed by Jinnai Takano in the 1991 NHK adaptation of Taiheki, which also looks pretty excessive somehow. In the 10th month of 1340, Sasaki Doyo became embroiled in a scandal that led eventually to his exile, though the aggrieved party sought execution. It's of particular interest because it represents one of Doyo's few political miscalculations. This is the affair known as the Myoho-in incident. So, a group of young Doyo clients, led by his eldest son Hidetsuya, were making their way back from a hunting expedition, which, like many contemporary social gatherings, was an occasion for drinking. The season being very early winter, the autumn foliage is still on beautiful display, and as the partygoers walk through the hills, they see an enchanting branch of colored maple poking over the wall of the Myoho-in temple. You can see there's them and there's the Myoho-in temple. So Myoho-in was a Monzeki temple, that is, one with a mandate to house members of the imperial family. This branch is so tempting that one of the young members tries to break it off and take it home, but the abbot sees this and as a monk warned the young man off. Being young, drunk, and now provoked, he tries to break off an even bigger branch. The conflict devolves into a brawl. I think you can see the brawl kind of unfolding right there. The conflict devolves into a brawl, but the party manages to retreat with their prized branch in hand. When Doyo hears that his affiliates have been so roughly handled, there's a bigger picture of the brawl. When he hears that his affiliates have been so roughly handled, he's so incensed that he sends a group of warriors to burn the temple down. It being not only led by an imperial prince, but also under the administrative umbrella of the powerful Enryakuji temple complex, this causes problems for Doyo. The clergy cease to perform prayers and rituals on behalf of the government and demand execution for all the offending parties. But in the end, the sentence is commuted to exile. So in context, Basara appears at the very beginning of the passage. At that time, Doyo especially flourished. A group of young retainers of the lay monk Sasaki Doyo, adjutant of Sado, whose extravagance astonished the eyes of others, exhausting the limits of refinement in their usual Basara manner, sought the island leads by the road Nishiyama and Higashiyama, and, well, you know what happens after that. So remember, this is the only place that the word Basara appears in the most common manuscript Taiheki. I think it makes best sense to read it in light of our previous examples in which the word meant something like dancerly, or maybe descriptive of moving cloth. It's not difficult to imagine the scene. There's a cadre of young, drunk, fashionable children, essentially, strolling through the hills on the edge of the capital, just returning from a social gathering. How they act, particularly how they walk, that's Basara, exhausting the limits of refinement. In both examples, rather here, Basara is equated clearly with fashion and importantly with elegant fashion, that is, kuryu. In this sense, it's similar to the older courtly aesthetic of Miyabi, which is most interestingly translated by Joshua Mostow at UBC as impetuous elegance. Miyabi is closely associated with the Tales of Basari, a series of poetic vignettes clustering around the amorous courtier Ariwana no Marihira. Moscow defines Miyabi as including both courtliness and, quote, a kind of violent ardor that refuses to be constrained by political calculation. So, Basara is not simple gaudiness. It's an aesthetic mode that holds a place next to the height of refinement. Any group of young drunk idiots can meander their way down the road in fancy clothes, but this group has the Basara edge. It's not so much what you do as how you do it. To review in brief, the three descriptive instances of Basara we've seen here are the Basara movement of the dancer's clothing, the 5 ribs of the Basara fan from the Nijo Kawara Rakusho, and the young doyo posse Basara-ing on their way back from an outing. Taking the last example, in light of the first two, we can argue in the context of the early 14th century, Basara meant something close to strutting. It is ostentatious display, but on a small scale, on the level of the physical body. Your over-the-top clothing may be considered basara if you wear it right. You can basara your way on the way back from a party, but neither the clothes nor the party are basara in and of themselves. Basara is only a feature that contributes to its overall effect. That's basara in the narrowest sense in the early 14th century. So, what is that party then? There's clearly something more to this broader maximalist aesthetic that doyo is associated with in taiheki. What are we talking about when we talk about basara? So I mentioned before that I used the term transgressive excess. So in transgressive excess, what is transgressed? First of all, there are prescribed standards of taste. You might ask whose taste we're talking about here, and without going full Baudrillard, we're basically talking about the conservative taste of mid-level aristocrats and landed warriors. Related to this, Basara also transgresses class boundaries. In such a stratified society, when those in power feel the class structure flattening, they start clutching their pearls, so to speak. And the third point of transgression is related to this: public order. Things fall apart. Last, in its heavy use of foreign, which in this period means Chinese decoration, Basara transgresses political borders. So now let's take a look at a few places where all of these points come out. So during the early to mid-1300s, a popular dance called Dengaku swept the capital and Kamakura. From the descriptions that remain, Dengaku was a frenetic acrobatic dance in which the performers wore elaborate costumes and jumped and spun all over the stage to the amazement of spectators. Little is known about the origins of Dengaku, but it seems to have begun as a sort of ritual dance that accompanied the rice planting season, and by the late Heian period was often performed in conjunction with or under the auspices of shrines and temples. By the 14th century, however, it had become separated from agriculture and was enjoyed as an independent spectacle. Now, what's wrong with little dancing? Well, first of all, the aristocrats were not a fan. It was vulgar. When the Nijo Kawara Rakusho mentions it, it's lumped together with dogfighting, which was also popular. Here's dogfighting in taiheki. When the aristocrat Sanjo Kintaro writes about it in his diary, his biggest complaint is about the expense, saying that the daimyo compete and grant awards for it, the expenditure reaching extraordinarily enormous amounts. There's also the fact that it is a true epidemic, drawing crowds from all walks of life. Looking at this image from the illustrated scroll of Taiheki, you can see, if not aristocrats, there are certainly people in court garb, and probably worst of all, you can see tonsured monks kind of scrambling to get into the crowd to watch. But that's not even most of it. So this is something that happened. Changing the rhythms of the flute and drums, the musicians played as a dancer jumped onto a banister, spun left, turned right, threw his hands up in the air as he spun around again. Truly, their fine and graceful appearance did not seem to be of this world. So in the stands of over 100 ken, which is about 200 meters, it's pretty big, cries of joy rang out as the spectators shouted, unable to bear the excitement and incapable of staying in their seats. "Oh, it's so wonderful, I can't stand it." But soon, as they cried out, "Oh no, what's this?" the stands collapsed all at once, just like shogi pieces falling one on another. It was like dominoes. You can see here the dance, it's big, but musicians, dancers on stage, and as we move to the other side, we see collapse. Nice effect, right? Yeah. Though the word Basara does not appear, we've talked about dancers in Basara already, and the crowd gets whipped into such a frenzy they can't stay in their seats, literally bringing down the house. The injuries are both great in number and variety, and looting is rampant in the ensuing chaos. There are even suggestions of supernatural beings at work. You can see this guy over here, right? That's a penguin, a sort of bird goblin among the wreckage. The hierarchy is threatened here as well in the presence in those same stands of the aristocrat and patron saint of linked verse poetry, Nijo Yoshimoto, Prince Moroyoshi, Godai's son, and at that time head of the entire Tendai Buddhist order, basically the Tendai Pope, and also Takauji, founder of the coming Muromachi shogunate. It's only the Dengaku performance that makes this mixing of social classes possible. Then there's the matter of imported goods. This one's about Doyo. In Taiheki, he surrounds himself with a vastly large number of Chinese goods, and these goods are integral to his whole thing. At this point in time, Chinese goods were luxuries. This in turn loops back to the first point of transgression about traditional courtly taste. So writing only a decade or so earlier, close to the beginning of the Kendo Restoration, Yoshida Kenko describes exactly the sort of acquisitiveness for Chinese things in his essays in Idleness. A house which multitudes of workmen have polished with every care, where strange and rare Chinese and Japanese furnishings are displayed, and even the grasses and trees in the garden have been trained unnaturally, is ugly to look at and most depressing. How could anyone live for long in such a place? This is Don McKean's translation, the late Don McKean. This must have been enough of a phenomenon to first draw Kenko's eye and then his scorn as an argument of good taste. Of course, using and appreciating Chinese goods was nothing new in Japan. Doyo, though, does nothing by half measure. So, at one point, forces from the southern court are about to enter the capital. The geography of Kyoto makes it very difficult to defend, so if you hold Kyoto but feel like you're about to lose it, the best strategy has historically been to pull out, let the opposing forces come in, and then, counterattack once you've regrouped. So, as Doyo prepares his residence for these guests, his possessions are itemized. Pulling up the tatami mats in the guest quarter, he spread out a tiger skin, hung an icon kannon by Zhang Sengyo, and with it an ink landscape by Wang Yangyuan. On a pterocarpus wood table, he placed an ancient bronze tripod, and with it a brass kettle and silver pitcher. In the wooden alcove, there was a grass script epigram by Wang Xizhi and a copy of the Diamond Sutra by Zhang Zizhi. This actually is a copy of the Diamond Sutra by Zhang Zizhi from the National Palace Museum in Taipei. You don't even need to know who these people are to be impressed. With the exception of Wang Yangyuan, they're all exceptionally famous in their arts. Doyo's clothes, his books, his art, his incense, his pillow, his tea set, even his pajamas are all imported. The Chinese lens of Doyo's particular brand of Basara allows him to vicariously participate in the contemporary border crossing exchanges by both merchants and, at the time, Zen monks, and forces us to consider the foreign origin of these objects with which he surrounds himself. Let's now turn to the main episode that I want to talk about tonight, that kind of brings it all together. The promotional blurb for this talk mentioned the tea ceremony, and I myself have already mentioned Doyo's connection to tea things. It's actually his tea gatherings, and one in particular, that sets the precedent for defining Basara in terms of Baroque gaudiness. And it's not surprising why. After the destruction of the Myoho-in complex, no scene associated with Sasaki Doyo is better known than the flower viewing at Oharam in the section titled The Lay Monk Gocho Done In by Slander. In the 7th month of 1366, the general Shiba Takatsune, known in the text by his religious name Docho, invited the shogun Ashikaga Yoshiakira to have an affair at his residence, to be held on the evening of the 7th day, that of the Tanaba festivities. Doyo and Docho were political rivals within the Ashikaga government, and Docho made a particular point of inviting Doyo so that he might gain the spoils of a hard-won social coup. Doyo, however, proved to be not such an easy mark. Political animal that Doyo was, he first agreed to attend, but at the same time began making arrangements for an event of his own on the very same day, so glittering and opulent that the shogun wouldn't even consider missing it. In so doing, not only could Doyo snub Docho, but he could get the shogun to as well. He summoned all the best artisans in the capital and set about the creation of a pleasure site so magnificent it would be without parallel in the world. The craftsman did not disappoint. And I apologize, when I've given you translations before, I've also given you the Japanese, but I'm not going to be able to do that here. So it's just too much text. So I apologize for that in advance. But you can at least follow along with the English. So, when the day finally came, Doyo set off for the hills of Ohara and Osio, along with members of houses that dress in light furs and ride fattened horses. That means fancy people. They stopped their carriages in the foothills and climbed, clambering up green vines, passing through twists and hidden places. The flowers and trees grew thickly around the meditation hall. And in this passage, there are clearly both Shinto and Buddhist religious complexes at Oharano, but they're not really identified specifically in the text. Crossing over a stream that ran through a deep and turning valley near the temple gate, the path became as narrow and tangled as sheep's entrails, which is a common metaphor, it's not just a weird thing here. And the grade became steep. The railings were covered in gold brocade and ornamental post knobs and silver leaf, with woolen carpets from the continent and brocade from Chengdu spread over the bridges, and fallen flowers piling on top of them. Even though it lay in a shadowy veil, not touched by the morning sun, the bridge's planks shone as if covered in snow. When the revelers stepped on them, their feet were cool. When they tread on them, their boots were fragrant. At this point, the revelers have crossed a threshold. As they disembark from their carriages at the foothills of the mountain, they begin a quasi-religious ascent from the mundane world. I say quasi-religious because though it may have many of the hallmarks of ascetic reverie, steep ascent along the narrow path, feelings of coolness with fragrances, it is in no way explicitly religious. Rather, it skirts religion. The partygoers go near a temple, but don't enter. As we'll see in a bit, they feel like heavenly mortals, but there's no indication that their bodies have been transmuted or that that's even their goal. Even when one allows for the fact that the line between the religious and the secular is much less clear in pre-modern Japan than it is today, the degree to which this gathering borrows only from the surface of religious ritual is remarkable. Crossing the windy stone bridge, they found water running through open bamboo pipes and water boiling for tea in a stone tripod. The water rushed with a sound like wind through pines and was so full of the sweet scent of spring that drinking just one cup would instantly make one feel like a heavenly mortal. They had tied celadon incense burners to each curling branch of the wisteria with pinghorn sashes, and incense and rare aloes wood burning on a table decorated with gold wire. These pinghorn sashes are red sashes that were part of Zen monks' habits at the time. The spring breeze was so filled with warm scents that, without realizing it, the partygoers felt as if they had entered a forest of fragrant china berries. As the manifest of luxury items rose to an improbable length, Doyo's guests are overwhelmed. Each sense is addressed. The boiling tea is heard through the poetic filter of the wind and pines. The air is filled with clouds of pungent incense. The incense sits on a table glittering with golden ornamentation. As they taste the tea, the guests feel as if they've been lifted into an undying plain. The breeze is warm, and the ground coverings underfoot are soft and cool. This is the logic of the aesthetic of transgressive excess. Any one of these items alone, and in lesser degree, could have passed muster as the height of taste in earlier times amongst different guests. The loveliness of a single scent or sound elicits sighs of admiration in the world of the tale of Genji. Not so under Doyo's curation. Not only are there whole carpets of brocade and billowing clouds of incense, either of which would be impressive on their own, but both at the same time. Each bodily sense is addressed directly and overthrown. And when all senses are undone, the partygoers enter a world colored by the unreal. They become untethered from their physical surroundings. The world they see is no longer even Japan, but leaping over the sea to China. They cast their gaze 1,000 li away and crane their necks to see the mountains in all four directions. Amid the thickly layered mist, the mountains and streams soared up together without taking up colored brushes, but with all the concentration of spending 10 days painting a single stream. They could see the 4 oceans and 5 lakes right where they stood without moving an inch. The 4 oceans and 5 lakes refer to famous sites throughout China, and hence the whole world. Sighing 3 times with each step, they climbed higher and higher until they reached the courtyard of the main temple building. In the courtyard, 10 arm spans wide, there were 4 blossoming trees. This is my favorite part. Around each tree, the craftsmen had cast flower vases of fine bronze, each fully 1 jewel high, it's about 10 feet, turning them into pairs of flower arrangements. Between them, there were 2 incense burners, 2 armspans round placed on tables. As the partygoers burned rare incense by the Fistful, just naming the talk, the fragrant breeze scattered to the 4 directions, and all present felt that they were in the world of many fragrances, which is a heavenly realm mentioned in the Vimalakirti Sutra. About incense. So during the 1300s, competitive incense appreciation, which sounds very cool, had reached a fever pitch. Even if the defined rule-bound art in and of itself wouldn't come into its own for nearly another 100 years. The Nijo Kawara Rakusho, this bit of graffiti we've talked about, castigates the citizens of the capital for overfondness of incense competitions, even associating it with these dogfights and dengaku dancing, which were widely acknowledged to be ill portents. It says, though all say that the dogfighting in dengaku brought the downfall of the kanto, that means kamura, dengaku is still as popular as ever. Gatherings for tea and incense in 10 varieties have been popular in Kamakura for some time, but now they grow prodigiously in the capital. Sounds like a bad thing. What then were these incense gatherings like? No direct descriptions remain, but in the Rakusho, tea and incense are formulated as a single category, indicating that for whoever wrote it, they were to some degree linked activities. The tea section of this Doyo party is coming up, so let's put a pin in this and come back to it. Suffice to say that the tea gatherings themselves were raucous occasions for gambling, when the normal structures of the social order were bent to the point of breaking, and the tossing of rare incense into the censer by the Fistful is one of the first indications that, beyond being merely sumptuous, this gathering of doyos was situated obliquely to the standard social order, despite, or maybe precisely because of, the presence of the shogun himself. The passage continues. Afterwards, they raised curtains, set up kyokuroku chairs, which are these chairs with backs and armrests associated with Zen monks. If you remember Doyo's portrait from earlier, he's sitting in one. They prepared marvelous dishes of 100 flavors and had a tea contest of 100 rounds. Prizes for the winners were piled as high as a mountain. All at once, the dancers danced in like spinning simmers, flapping their wings. The musicians played as finely as spring warblers, sticking out their tongues in song, and all gathered there, took off their short-sleeved robes, shitatare suits, which are the suits warriors wore, and under trousers of all various colors and patterns, and flung them to the performance. It sounds like a concert. As the excitement reached its peak and the drunkenness along with it, there was no moonlight to light their returning path, so with torches glittering to heaven, the axles of their carriages, inlaid with mother of pearl, thundered along, and their fine, small horses jingled their bits as they galloped away. One could say that the commotion was not at all different from the 3 worms and 100 demons passing through town late at night. 100 demons kind of make sense, but these worms were worms that some believed lived inside of you, but would then escape at night sometimes to go narc on you, report on your activities to the divines. During those 20 days, between the blossoms flowering and fading, everyone in the city acted as if crazed. Wozi wrote of the bewitching color of the peonies, and truly one finds that the scene must have been just like that. The ears and eyes of all who heard of or saw it were amazed. Now for the tea. The consumption of tea seems to have entered Japan with Zen Buddhism in the late Heian or early medieval period, and, as in China, first gained popularity in the centers of Buddhist learning as both an aid to practice and as one of a number of decoctions thought to aid one's health. The Japanese discourse surrounding tea consumption begins in the early 13th century with Myoan Eisai, or Osai's, Kissa Yojoki, which is drinking tea for nourishing life. Eisai presents tea primarily as a medicine use, one balancing the 5 viscera, as understood in traditional Chinese medicine, which is liver, lungs, heart, spleen, and kidneys, which in Eisai's scheme correspond to the 5 different flavors. Tea is bitter, and thus good for the heart, apparently. In fact, Eisai could find no other bitter foods regularly consumed in Japan, and thus tea would be a patient's only hope for strengthening the heart muscles. So this is important medicine. Over the course of the following century, tea begins to move out of the monasteries and into the parlors of elites and aesthetes, describing a historical arc similar to that of tea in China. By the beginning of the 14th century, the consumption of tea had taken on a very different flavor, so to speak. No longer consumed only as a medication aid and less still as a medicinal decoction, the center of tea consumption had fallen firmly into the hands of connoisseurs. An entry from the diary of Emperor Hanazo contains the following description from the 11th month of 1324. Recently, a person said that Suketomon Toshimoto and others have brought together a group that meet to go wild in pursuit of pleasures. Some wear neither clothes nor hats, and nearly naked they hold tea drinking gatherings. Perhaps this is in study of the style of connoisseurs. This is the infamous bureko, which might literally be translated as lecture group without etiquette, but I think Taiheiki's first translator, Helen Craig McCullough, gives it a little more flavor as the band of cloisterers. It was a space where the niceties of the social order are forgone for the sake of both free exchange of ideas and dissipation. Hino Suketomo and Hino Toshimoto, no relation, were both aristocrats closely involved with Emperor Go-Daigo's early anti-Bakufu machinations. Both were captured and both were executed in 1352. The text of Taiheiki itself makes a link between this sort of behavior and socially damaging anti-government activity. Early in the narrative, Suketomo's bureko is described thus. The style of this drinking social astonished the ears and eyes of those who heard of and saw it. As the cups made their round, none paid mind the high or low station. The men cast off their court caps and undid their top knots, while monks wore only white underrobes without vestments only. Now, bigger picture. Now, not wearing a hat may not seem like that drastic of a move for a revolutionary, but for courtiers, being seen without a hat was almost like being seen naked. Maybe even worse. There are descriptions from the Heian period of men struggling to keep their hats on in intimate situations. The description goes on to describe scantily clad serving girls and feasting, but I think for readers at the time, this hatlessness would actually have been more shocking and certainly more suggestive of a lapsed social order. This was not the style, this was not only the style of those plotting political insurrection, but also the expected atmosphere for contemporary tea competitions. Granted, it doesn't say the word tea here, but it does in Hanazono's diary, and the literary scholar of the history of tea, Kumakura Isako, agrees that it must have been a tea competition because no other kind of gathering was, at the time, was so riotous or paid so little attention to etiquette and ritual. This argument is strengthened by the Oharamo episode. Here's another picture of the band of roisterers. As the revelers reward the dancers for capping the evening with fine entertainment, they toss them their clothes literally from their own backs as payment. Now, this practice itself is not unusual. You go to see a mill performance. If you are the shogun, you might give the performer your cloak. But in accordance with the aesthetic of Basara, the members of Doyo's party take things a step further, stripping themselves down all the way to their underwear in order to give the dancers their due. By describing the partygoers as going to this length in disrobement, the text of Taiheiki activates this association with the wild tea drinkers of the day and the perceived antisocial tendencies thereof, another facet of the broadly defined transgressive excess thing. So, there you have it. The old Haramo episode really has everything you could want from Basara. Medieval maximalism, transgressive excess, whatever you want to call it. You have, I want to call it transgressive excess, to make that clear. You have a flattening of the social hierarchy, you have raucous entertainment that more conservative elements turn their noses up at, you have mountains of Chinese goods, and you have the dancers twirling for the audience, activating the narrowest definition of Basara as well. What more could you want? So what about Basara after Basara? In the blurb for this talk, I suggested that in Basara, we could find a medieval form of a maximalist aesthetic present throughout Japanese history, so where does it go? As I've already noted, Basara was not a coherent school or movement, so it's a little hard to track, but there are nonetheless moments when you can see it raising its head in later Japanese history. Once you're in the Edo period, of course, finding examples of an exuberant culture of display adjacent to traditional court aesthetics becomes much less difficult. So here I'm going to highlight a couple of illustrative instances that push the aesthetic to the to the end of the 16th century. So there's Ohan again. So the first example keeps things in the family, so to speak. The third shogun of the government inaugurated by Takauji was Yoshimitsu, famous today for his patronage of the arts, particularly the Noh theater. Many of you are likely familiar with Rokuonji, also called Kinkakuji, the Temple of the Golden Pavilion, so named because of its golden pavilion. Even if you've never been, you've probably heard of the novel by Mishima Yukio about the acolyte who burns the building down. That actually happened in the 1950s. It was reconstructed soon after, but the gold that they applied quickly began to kind of flake off with damage, and it had to be redone in the 80s. So you might be thinking, okay, yes, gold, yes, Basara, I see. That's not actually what I want to talk about. In fact, it wasn't originally as golden as it is now. Here is a print by Hiroshige showing gold trim. Now, this may not be completely accurate itself, but you can bet that if the whole thing was gold, he would have painted it gold. The estate was purchased by Yoshimitsu in 1397, and the eponymous pavilion built at his pleasure. The facility was made a Zen temple after his death. The gold of the modern incarnation certainly has shock value, but the building itself is impressive for its architecture, which you can see better in this picture postcard from sometime in the early 20th century. Its construction spills over the boundaries of any one style. The first floor is in the Shinden-zukuri style, typical of aristocratic residences. The second floor is in the Shoin-zukuri style, which was adopted by the warrior elites and uses interior space in a much different way. The third, crowning floor, it was built to the most up-to-date standards of Chinese Buddhist architecture circa 1400. Obviously, you can build a building in any one of these styles, and a mishmash could easily result in an awkward and ungainly presentation, but the commitment to the extravagance, to have not one, not two, but three distinct architectural styles stacked on top of each other somehow brings it all together. The gold just drives it home. This is Basara. More is more, and then even more on top of that. I'll end tonight by bringing things to the edge of Edo with Toyotomi Hideyoshi, the second of the three great unifiers of Japan. There's a lot to say about Hideyoshi, but I'll keep things brief. I want to talk about a tea gathering held in 1587. Hideyoshi was long a student of tea, practicing. Stop moving. There's Hideyoshi. Okay. Hideyoshi was long student of tea, practicing twice daily, even when on campaign. It's well known that he learned from Senno Ikkyu, the master held in reverence by the Wabi-cha tradition today. Much of modern tea culture moves through Ikkyu. Hideyoshi's 1587 event was not in the Ikkyu style. It's believed to be the largest tea event in history, held on the 25th day of the second month. In preparation, announcements were posted throughout the capital advertising unlimited public participation. Foreigners, especially resident Chinese, were expressly welcomed. The event was to last 10 days. It actually only lasted one because Hideyoshi got tired, but it was supposed to last 10 days. Hideyoshi gave away hundreds of valuable tea implements to participants selected by lottery. And while thousands of guests had tea in innumerable makeshift tea rooms erected around the Kitano temple shrine complex, Hideyoshi himself performed the tea ceremony in his famous golden tea room, which was exactly what it sounds like. A Spanish missionary who saw it said that even the chopsticks were made of gold. Here we have a modern reconstruction from the Emerald Tea Bar in Atane. So what about Basara after this? Was this tea gathering even Basara? You know, I'm honestly not sure. Like Old Hanoi, it definitely has a political undercurrent, but in this case, all was affirming the sovereign. It certainly has a lot, but Basara is a lot plus a little more. Maybe the chopsticks, that's a little bit more. But I still think the high tide of Basara had subsided by this point. And Basara after that. By the Edo period, the medieval style of Basara is less apparent, but the whole more is more maximalist thing clearly lives on. The center, though, moves from elite warriors to commoners. Kabuki theater in particular comes to mind with its elaborate staging, intricate plotting, and overwhelming costuming. Now, in Japan, you don't have to look very hard to find cartoons or video games that pile excess on excess. Go to Kabukicho in Shinjuku, and that's a whole other thing. It's easy to find in the modern world. It's so easy, in fact, that I'd like to end the talk today by turning back to the medieval and asking you to not be like me when I was first getting interested in medieval Japan, seeing things in the past in black and white just because it's difficult to find pictorial examples of people who lived in life. Look for the absurd, the egregious, and the excessive in the past, not because the past is a foreign country and all this other to us, and these things are weird, but precisely because the past is not past, and things have always been almost as ridiculous as they are today. ご清聴ありがとうございました。